Hey, what's up, guys? Today I have what I can say is my personal grail, a Todd Begg full custom bodega. And I'm going to do this video a little bit differently than I usually do. Um, Talking not just about the knife, but about the history of Todd Begg. And just a disclaimer before we begin. My information is, incomplete. It may not be fully correct, but this is what, I've learned throughout the years by talking to people, to collectors, to Todd himself, or, reading things online. It might likely have a lot of missing points or gaps in the story, and feel free to chime in the comments if there's something that I put there out there that is misinformation, or something that you can add in. Very, very welcome to have you guys participate there. But in order, before we begin or talk about the history about Todd Begg, I just want to talk about the knife first, because I'm sure you guys are really curious about this bodega, how it is, etc. The bodega has been introduced quite a while ago, but this one is made in 2022. If you can see here, it's signed by Todd Begg. So this is, a full custom made by Todd himself, in his shop in Texas. And it features, a beautiful Damasteel blade, Mokume scales, and mirror polished scales with the jeweled subframe lock and the jeweled clip. Again, let's start with the blade. The blade is, again, it's Damasteel, but this blade, unlike some of the other full customs that Todd do, this is a fully mirror polished blade. It's a little bit harder to see. You can kind of see how it reflects the light, but Todd's mirror polish is unlike most other guys out there. You're talking about half micron mirror polish, and I'm sure a lot of you guys who follow me have heard about half micron before, but when you ask Todd, how is a mirror polished blade done properly, how long does it take? Believe it or not, I talk with Todd every day and he shows me pictures every day. It took him 5 full days just to do the mirror polish on this blade. Just think about that. 5 full days going, grit by grit, whether or not it's, the sandpaper that you start out with, you go up to 7,000 grit, 9 micron, 6 micron, 3 micron, and then half micron, which is, basically 160,000 grit finish, which really, in person, it reflects light like nothing else. It's a super clean polish. It might not look very clean now, because I do have some, fingerprint or smudges on it, but it is reflective, extremely reflective, and extremely beautiful. The Bodega, again, features his legendary, or his trademark, well, it's not trademark, but it is his design, where you have the alternating size holes in his groove. And what makes Todd's design so special, even from the beginning, if you look at all of his designs, it's super futuristic. Really, this knife has been designed, like, I believe maybe 10 years ago, maybe a decade old, but it still looks extremely futuristic. But what is interesting to me is that it's still a very user-friendly blade shape. This is a very nice classic drop point, but the way he styles it, with his blood groove, with the really aggressive jimping, and my goodness, this jimping is extremely aggressive. You can choke up on the blades, which, to be honest, I really don't do much on most of the knives because I don't really feel the need to choke up this high. But Todd specifically made this part unsharpened. This is the blade is sharpened all the way here, but this part is unsharpened, which means you can easily put your finger there if you do want to choke up on the blade. But going back to the point, it's a classic blade shape, extremely user-friendly, but it looks very futuristic. This is what I love about Todd's design. If you go look at the Glimpse design, where it's more of a Warrenclyffe shape, it's still a really user-friendly blade. If you look at the edge itself, very, very user-friendly. The Field Marshal, same thing. The Quaken, even though it's a little bit of a, Persian, little bit of a Persian tip there, it's still mostly overall a very EDC oriented blade shape. And that's what you see on Todd's knives, which, if when after Todd, I'll get into the whole story after, but after he left the California shop, where his brother and the partner took over, the designs that come out afterwards, even though it is futuristic, you see this really huge recurves, which it's not usable at all. It's not user friendly. It's just there for style. Believe me, I bought one, and I tried it out, and it wasn't for me. And I realized when I bought that one that, hey, actually it's very different. Even though it is a futuristic design, Todd Begg-esque style, it's not the same, because this is just a really classic user-friendly blade made to look extremely modern. So that's what I really appreciate about the blade. The flipper tab is, has no jimping, but this doesn't need it. We'll get into the action a little bit later. Next, let's touch on the scale itself. So the scale is mokume, and for those of you who don't know, it's a mix of titanium, copper, gold, bronze. I'm not entirely sure what this specific mokume is like. I believe it is copper and gold and titanium, and it's extremely beautiful. Mokume is made, it's like a Japanese style, I guess Damascus, where they want to make this look like wood grain. Hence, the nice Japanese background cloth, just to go with the video. But it is fully mirror polished on both sides. And again, sorry for the fingerprint marks, but the polish on here is not as polished as the blade. The blade is like the half micron polish, so it's crazy. This is, I don't think is as high. I don't think Todd goes as high here, so it's still extremely reflective, but it won't be the same level of finishing as the blade. But I think it's more than what most other knife makers do. I haven't seen a full mirror frame like this in a while, and I get it why. I think a lot of people won't like the smudges that gets on it, but for me, when I talked to Todd and I got to know that, hey, he's preparing the Dama steel blade, the titanium frame with mokume, I was like, hey, what are you planning to do in terms of finishing for the frame? And he said he's gonna make this all mirror. This is gonna be mirror polished. He wanted to jewel ice this part, which is basically, the same as this. But he wanted to do royal blue finish. And to me, I personally don't really like that combination as much. Actually, there was one knife before that Todd did, a Bodega as well, where the blade was actually like a blue Damascus. It's like a carbon Damascus blade, beautiful blade, but the frame is also, it's I think it's like copper with the ice jeweled blue, and it to me wasn't as attractive. So I told Todd, hey, please, I would like just a mirror polish frame, and I think it came out looking very, very good. Um, and I haven't had another one of Todd's knives in a little while, and check out the inlay work. I'm not sure if this will, it is not really focusing very well, but the inlay work here is some of the tightest work that I've had in a while, because most of the time, a lot of the inlay work, when you just put your finger between the two seams, you can feel something. Here you don't feel any transition, not at all. But the real test is if you use your fingernail to feel the seam. Do you feel it? Barely, barely. Like in some parts you do feel it a little bit, like very slightly, like here, and then some parts here, nothing. Especially around the curves, where I bet he can, when he fitted it and he ground it down, it's just perfect fit. I mean, it's just some of the tightest work that I've had, even though I've had so many knives before. That is very impressive. I really like that. As for the pivot, this is again another polished part with the ice jeweled island, classic Todd Begg design for the Bodega. I really love this design. It gives it a nice, unique character. In terms of let's see, the screws are anodized gold, which goes very well with the inlays. I love that. And on this side is a little bit interesting. I didn't know he was gonna jewel this part gold and anodize it gold, but I think it looks very nice. It goes along well with the color of the mokume. It makes the lock side that much more interesting. Usually, when you have the frame side, the show side, people tend to just stay on this side, but Todd made this side equally as interesting. And this is something that I still don't see many makers do, a subframe lock. I don't know if it is a patent issue or not, or a trade or something like that, but I love how Todd is able to screw in this lock, and essentially if anything ever goes wrong, you don't have to replace the whole side. You can just replace this lock part, which it's still a pretty big piece, to be honest, to replace, but it's much better than having to redo the mokume on the handles if it ever wears down, which I've never had a Todd Begg starting to develop blade play or anything like that. It's the lockup is super solid, and it stays solid for a long time. The clip again is ice jeweled with the golden screws, but this one is mirror polished silver. Looks very nice. The pocket clip. Again, this one works really well. A lot of people, when this bearing pocket clip was first introduced, people were going crazy for it because it worked really well. It goes into the pocket with only one hand, and it has very nice retention. But afterwards, some people graduate and say that, hey, it's not, it doesn't work as well. But for me, I think it's the way that it's been built. Because I've had, the bearing pocket clips on some other knives which aren't built as well. So when you try to pocket it, it sometimes is like super stiff, it wouldn't go in, or sometimes it goes in super easily and it just has no retention. But that's not the case on this, full custom from Todd. It works really, really well. Just beautiful. The inside, again, not sure you can see, but he jewels the liners on the inside. Maybe it will be easier to see here. Sorry I don't have the correct lighting, but again, he jewels it, all the liners, and every single part of this knife has been finished. He like touched every single part of this knife, and it's just a really, really lovely knife. Just incredible. I'm not gonna go too far in the the design aspect of things, because for me, I feel like for example, like the lock bar release is super helpful. The jimping at the back here locks it in very nicely. When you try to flip the knife, it locks into your skin nicely, so you can have a strong purchase on the grip of the knife. I think it's overall a really well done knife. You can do a nice reverse handhold. It's a solid design. It's a futuristic looking knife, yet it functions really well. And yeah, so oh yes, next let's talk about the action. How can I do 17 minutes into the video without talking about the action? But here we go. I've had maybe up to around 10 Todd Begg knives, some of them full customs, some of them mid-tex, some of them full production. And out of all of them, this takes the cake. I mean, this is the best action out of all of those. And out of most of my knives that I've held, the detent on this piece perfectly tuned. So it's not easily, you don't slip off the detent tab very easily, but it's very nice and tight. You can see, when it fires out, my hand shakes a little bit. It has a little bit of a recoil because it fires out super hard. It has zero lock stick. It doesn't even feel like it is touching the blade, but it does, because it's a really solid lockup. You can see there, it's a really solid lockup, and you shake it a little bit, it comes down really smoothly. It's a glass smooth action, and just listen to the when the detent goes, when the blade goes into the detent. There's a little bit of a mechanical boop, which sounds really nice. It just feels more refined to me compared to a lot of the other models and other knives, because like it fires really hard, and then it just goes in nice and easily. The lock bar is not too hard, perfectly tuned, yet it fires really nicely. Super fun to play with. I just love the action on this knife. Just one of my favorites that I've played with, because not only does it fire hard, it closes extremely smoothly. Like, it feels so good. Oh, did you hear that? Kind of metallic. Okay, I think that's enough about the knife itself. Right now, I want to talk a little bit about the history on Todd Begg, and I know I prefaced this in the start, so if there's any information that is missing, you know, please just take things with a grain of salt, because I'm not Todd Begg, and and I'm just trying to kind of tell the story about what his background is like, what his history is like, and the impact he has on the knife community. So, or at least from what I see as a collector. And this piece, again, before we go forward, the reason for me why it is a grail is not because it's just made by Todd Begg. This is Todd. You saw a lot of bodegas out there, but did you know that Todd has made less or fewer than 10 full custom bodegas? I believe this is either number 7 or 8. So, you guys out there who are who want to contact Todd, he's yet to make a 9 and 10. If you want to be under, 1 to 10 club, you got to contact him quickly. So this, first of all, is special. But second of all, it's a lot of collectors who watch Jim Skelton back in the day, when Jim had the big red bodega, the mid-tech. I really fell in love with that knife from the video that Jim made, and that is the knife that got me to start collecting custom knives. Before that, I bought an Emerson, I got a Chris Reeve, some other brands, Cold Steel, etc. But it was that video that made me understand why this knife is so much more special. And think about back then. Back then, there's no the action on knives aren't nearly as good as this. The flippers, if you actuate it, it won't flip very well. It's going to be off center, which obviously this isn't not. And then it loosens over time. There's just so many different things. It detents too hard, or you flip it and then your finger hurts after a while because it's sharp, or you go to move the lock bar away and then it hurts your thumb because it's not well designed, or if it's a liner lock it pinches your finger. So many different issues back in the day when people haven't really figured out how to make a flipper, but Todd Begg did figure it out, and he made it the mid-tech company where it, to me, it's not actually super mass. It's still very exclusive. Especially back then, is really exclusive. If you were able to get your hands on one, and the action was just incredible. And I did everything I had, just to get my hands on one. And boy, that was, the knife that lit the fire for me to go into the custom knife world. So. And then from that point on, looking at the website back then, they put both full customs and the mid-techs together on the same website, and there was a stark difference. The full customs were really beautiful, super colorful, all these materials I've never seen before, and then the mid-techs were, stonewash anodized, DLC blades or satin blades. And even that was just, I was so stoked just to see one or, get one. But finally, after years of searching, I ended up just being able to get it directly from Todd. This is truly is a grail. This is not the end of the journey, but to be able to finally, there's so many knife makers out there who are at a really high level, high price point, even higher than this, where you can get the knife if you had the money. But Todd has made fewer than 10 bodegas, and they all have disappeared somewhere. One, was in a fire. A really unfortunate story, but we'll talk, that's a whole nother story. And then there was the rest of them. If you try to find a full custom bodega, it's practically impossible. It's like disappeared in the hands of private collectors, and you couldn't get your hands on one. So to me, this is a super special piece. Okay, sorry for the slight delay in talking about how this knife is so special to me. Let's jump on to Todd. So Todd made his first folding knife in 1983 when he was in junior high. I think he's always loved knives since he was a kid, especially the Rambo knives, because he he was really inspired by the movies, and he even made a few knives dedicated to that movie. So that was really the thing that sparked the fire for him. Um, and when he was age 20, he joined the military. I believe it was the NBC recon team. And there in the military, there were a lot of things that he learned, but some of the things that helped him in his life afterwards was the value of leadership, the value of never giving up, because that team was, I think he was like the first class to join that recon team, and it was extremely tough, extremely difficult. You felt like you were dying, but he had to keep pushing forward. That is lesson number one for Todd, is to you can do anything if you put your mind to it. Lesson number two is the value of teamwork and leadership. And this is not just, regular teamwork leadership. This is teamwork in a life and death situation, where you really have to trust your team, where you're responsible for their lives. This really came into play, I think, later on when he formed the California shop, and he hired, his workers. He was the leader of the team, and he was able to build something really incredible with that business. That's just, you know, a massive success. And up to this day, I don't think there's any shop in the United States that makes the knives at that quality, in like the mid-tech tier, selling, and not like mass sale, but making it more widely available, at a really, it's at a premium price, but rightly so, because the knives that come out of that shop was better than most custom knives at that time when he was doing it. So that was extremely impressive, what he was able to achieve. But before we go to there, when Todd was still in the military, he was, reading Bob Loveless books on how to make knives, and he really, that kind of lit the fire for him to make knives for a living. So after the military, he joined, a machine shop. I think it was, let me see, I think it was in San Juan College in Farmington, in 1998. That was when, he went to the machine shop. He picked up the skills, to become a proper knife maker with, especially for folding knives, the mechanisms are really critical. So he went there knowing that he had to get everything right. He had to learn how to become a great machinist, and that's exactly what he does. Right out of school, he went in with a goal. He came out knowing how to make some of the best folding knives in the industry, and that's not what I can say for everyone. Going to school, coming out, and doing exactly what you intend to do and achieving it at this level. It's incredible. So again, after he was finished with his school, essentially he started making custom knives and making a name for himself, making fixed blades, crazy folders, etc. And when he his his name was pretty well known by then, and that's when his brother, Mark Begg. So, he came to Todd and says, "Hey, let's start a business to make this more productionized." Um, and Mark has a friend called Mattia, and the three of them were going to be a team. So essentially, you know, Todd was going to be the production guy, taking care of everything relating to production. Mark is going to be the marketing guy, taking care of, I guess the website, Instagram, etc. And then Mattia is the finance guy, taking care of, I guess accounting and taking care of the books essentially, payroll, etc. And I'm not entirely sure how the equity is split, but essentially Todd is going to be paid almost like an employee. He doesn't get to see a lot of the numbers, because he's just way too busy with the shop and hiring people, training people to make work like that he makes, and making it at this level. So he set up a shop, and he set up different stations. When you set up a shop for making something like this, you have to hire several people. Number one is you need someone who knows how to program a CNC. So you need a programmer, because if anything goes wrong with the CNC machine, the programming, the guy has to go in and adjust it. In making new models, he has to write in that program. So that's the first guy. The second guy is the shop lead, which again is Todd himself. So he has to lead the shop and look after everyone. The third person would be, let's say you have someone who's going to be the master at blade grinding. So you hire someone who will only grind blades. And then you hire someone to do finishing. So someone would sit there and, anodize the screws, or do jeweling, or, sharpen the knife. So it's a very, step-by-step process which he laid out for the whole shop in order to make, a knife that he made in mid-tech and be really well known. So he set up the whole production process, trained everyone, and started making a lot of knives, and making, the company even more famous. So I think that was extremely effective, and I think the business did very well. It took off. They even went on Discovery Channel at one time doing a series called Blade Brothers, although that shut down pretty quickly because, the storyline from the producers of the show wasn't very good. But that still, was really impressive to be able to get to that point, to make it onto Discovery Channel and be known as, one of the top knife makers in the world. That is quite an accomplishment. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about the drama of what happened to the California shop. So essentially, from what I've heard, is that when Todd was working at the California shop, he was working really, full-time job, from morning to evening, but he wasn't earning nearly enough to pay even basic living expenses, his house, school, electricity, to, take care of his children and his family. And even when he was working full-time at the shop, at night, after everyone goes home, he has to sit there and continue to make full customs just to be able to, feed his family essentially. And he said, he got tired of that. And there was also at one point where I believe he had he had a problem with the brother and the brother's friend, where he wasn't getting paid, or he wasn't getting paid enough. I'm not sure which one it was, but essentially he thinks that those guys were very greedy and not giving him some of the share of the profits, not paying him properly or not nearly enough. Especially when he started doing the production series, the Steelcraft series with Riade, he didn't really get to see the profit in that. Um, and even though the knife was in his design, he taught the guy. We'll go into that a little bit later, but essentially, all the work was done by him, but he didn't really get to see the benefits or the fruits, outcome, or the profit. It doesn't really get to him at all. So that's when, and you can kind of see it in the timeline that's when things kind of start to fall apart, and I don't blame anyone. I don't blame Todd, but it's a shame that it had to go down, because I still think that the shop and the team that he's built in terms of the production team was really impressive. So sad to see that things go down. So there was a lawsuit. It took a few years. Todd came out, and then started a new life in Texas, focusing purely on full customs. And now he's also doing his own line of production knives, etc. We'll get into that in a little bit. And essentially, the California shop, after Todd left, they made 2 new models, and then they essentially shut down, because number one, the leases on the machines ran out, and somehow the money wasn't managed well, and they couldn't retain the machines that they had. They couldn't retain the people. They couldn't pay them. And I guess in terms of production, everything was going down. After Todd left, that place died. If you look at it now, Mattia was doing a few fixed blades, which is much easier to do than the folders. They might be able to get back someday after they recoup the finance, and if they are able to get back the team, they might start making the knives again. But essentially now, those mid-techs that come out of the shop, that the knives, the bodegas that most people had, that was out of production after Todd left. So you can see how much influence and success comes directly from Todd himself. So again, a shame of what happened then, but now that he's made it, starting up again in Texas, I wish him best of luck. He has a new line of, he has a new model called the Citadel, and he made a new, I guess, production series with artisan cutlery, which the work is I haven't had it myself. I got one, but it's still on the way. So I'm looking forward to see how that comes out. So yeah, that's up to today. Todd was struggling with a little bit of from the lawsuit, so now he's kind of starting over again. And I still think that he makes some of the finest knives in the tactical knife market today. And yeah, before I think in the last topic that I want to touch on is, what is Todd's impact on the knife community? A lot of this is going to be my own opinions, what I've observed, and essentially I'll just talk a little bit about what I see and what I think as his achievements in the knife world, and the gifts that he's given. The first thing for me is inspiration, that is directly relatable, but I know by talking to a lot of other collectors who came up at a similar time as me, that it was the Big Red Bodega from Jim Skelton's video that made them start to love knives, made them start to want to collect knives. And if you started back then, that was, the knife to get. So I think he inspired a whole new generation of knife collectors and, kept things going, which is, very, very impactful, especially for someone as well known as him and as well regarded as him. And the second thing is the mid-tech genre. For me, when Todd started that mid-tech genre, that he was the only one who was making a mid-tech and selling it at $800-900, $1,000. No one was selling at that price point. Later on it was like 1,500 when Todd was still there. No one was selling at that price point, but it still sold out because the quality was as good or better than most full customs at the time. So he really redefined the mid-tech line, and he really upped the quality. And all the competitors that had to compete, that's what they had to compete against, and that's how they really had to up their. Just looking at the fact, for example, like the actions of the knives. Back then, no one made a D10 like Todd Begg, or in the Todd Begg Knives California shop. And everyone had to learn how to do a D10, how to set the the like Todd. That is one of the big achievements. So the other achievements was, for example, teaching knife makers. Todd, because he is so well known, he gets a lot of questions from newer knife makers, etc. But for example, the mirror polish that he gets, that he does here, the half micron, he taught that to Lee Lerman. And for those of you who don't know, Lee Lerman is an incredible knife maker out of Israel, and he does really beautiful mirror polishes. But he learned that from Todd Begg. Lee's knives now go for like over 10 grand US. From maker 5-6 grand, but secondary market 10 grand plus. But he got that skill from Todd Begg. And then even more impactful was David Deng from Riyadh Knives. So that for me was one of the biggest achievements that Todd made, or biggest impact he had on the knife community, because before then, all the Chinese knives that were coming out of China, the quality was not that great. It wasn't that great, and David knew that Todd was obviously one of the best makers in the world, in the tactical knife world. He flew into Todd's shop, sat down, and Todd taught him how to make the knife like this and make it this good. And that's when they were releasing their new first ever production model called the Steelcraft series, the Quaken model. And I even got one of those, and I have to say that was one of the best 425 or something like that dollars that I've spent on a knife, because the action was so good, it was so smooth, the finishing and the milling work on the knife was really clean, and it was so much better than what was coming out of China before then. So for me, that really kickstarted the whole outsourcing to China movement. He was one of the first guys to do that, but he's definitely one of the most famous guys to do something like that, with David Deng. And not only just setting a design for David to do, he taught him how to make it properly, how to make the quality just as good as he does, or what like the quality should be, a Todd Begg quality. That knife was a standout, and I mean, from that point on, for the good or bad, there's going to be many opinions on this, whether or not it's healthy for the knife community. Now that, looking at the market today in 2022, if you go to Blade Show, I think over half of the stuff that's sold there are from Chinese OEMs. But that whole thing, I believe, started with the Quaken, when Todd Begg was teaching David Deng how to make such high quality knives. and then other famous makers saw that, wanted to do the same thing, and it just from there that just spiraled into a whole different market. um, so that just gives you a level of indication that Todd has in the market. I think it's um, in terms of building the interest. If I joined the knife community today, I probably might not have been as into customs as I would have been if I when I started like 5-6 years ago, when I started looking at the knives. um, but he was able to make knives with great action, great finishing, available at a much more reasonable price point, much more accessible for everyone. So, I believe overall, for everyone who's collecting knives, if they want a good quality knife, they can get one for a much more reasonable price and much more widely available today. So that has to be a good thing, right? Anyways, most of the community might not agree because the way that it affects the custom game or the collector base who wants to understand the knife versus just like flicking the knife or looking at the action all day. But that's a whole nother different discussion. I'm just talking about how much impact that Todd has had in the industry. And you can also see that with artisan cutlery. If you go look at the reviews of the new Citadel that Todd did with Artisan, a lot of people at first were like, why is he doing this with Artisan? Because Artisan's quality are not that great. But and then he's doing a really complex model, the Citadel with the inlays. But they were able to pull it off, and that's because Todd went there and taught the guys how to make it right. The action, the inlays, the milling, etc. So yeah, I mean that's just another example of how he won up, the level of someone else, by being a great teacher and just being able to have that positive impact in the knife community. That's just really, really, really cool. And yeah, I mean, and lastly, I think he's had the impact on the design wise. I think this is less, not as, I guess, important as the other ones. But for example, the ball bearing clip, I believe a lot of South African makers use it now. A lot of guys used to do it as well back in the day. So he has, and then these grooves and the lines. He was one of the first to do that, or it's like his trademark design, and a lot of people try to do a similar thing. Another thing is the pivot surrounds. There wasn't a lot of that back in the day. If you look at the Quaken, there was like the double inlays. That style is also now used on several of the knives. So he does have a lot of really unique design cues that a lot of people not copy, but I guess borrow, and change it some way or the other. But he is an innovator. He comes up with these design cues, whether it's the groove, the jeweling, the subframe lock that he uses, ball bearing clip, etc. So yeah. Oh, and obviously the ceramic bearings. I think he was one of the first to really popularize the ceramic bearings, because before it was steel bearings. The action was good, but not extremely smooth. You can kind of feel the ball a little bit, but when you upgrade to ceramic, it's much smoother, and it also doesn't rust. So yeah, I mean, that's just him. If I can imagine if he wasn't taken out of the game for several years, I wonder what we would have gotten now, from the California shop, because I got some of those knives that even I got like a Damascus Bodega with like a mirror. I believe it was a mirror or a hand rub blade. Like the work was nice. It was very good. Inlays, etc. It was all very good, but it's still, the action's not the same. the level of finishing, it's not it's not as good, at least from my previous experience. And I think, you know, there's just something a little bit off on some of those, because I remember when you close the knife, when Todd wasn't there anymore, by the way, this is like after he left, like when you close it, you can hear a little bit of screeching, and then the action, sometimes one of them was tuned a little bit too hard, so it would hurt your finger a bit, which is like uncharacteristic. I don't think would have happened if Todd was there, etc. You know. Anyways, um, that's the story of Todd Begg. I mean, up to today, I hope it was interesting. I don't know if anyone would have stayed this long listening to me talk about, you know, his history, but I'm really thankful to, you know, have gotten to know Todd Begg. He's a wonderful person. He's really, really knowledgeable, and he's willing to teach you all of these things as well. And I'm so grateful to be able to get this knife in hand and, you know, direct from Todd. It's just incredible. So thank you so much for watching. This is one of the longest videos I've done, but well deserved, because the Bodega, I mean, as I said before, this was one of my grails to get a full custom from Todd. So, all right. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.